Hey everybody, welcome back to COVID Connect and to our series on Ignatian Discernment, which are strategies developed by Saint Ignatius of Loyola to help us make decisions in ways that are attuned to God's will. The best place to start is to explain two concepts that are really important to Saint Ignatius's thought. Those are consolation and desolation, which are probably words that you've heard before, but when Saint Ignatius uses them, he has a very specific meaning in mind. In particular, by consolation, Saint Ignatius is talking about a sensation that God gives us when we feel a sense of peace or confidence or joy connected to our spiritual lives. That last point is especially important because the consolation that Saint Ignatius is talking about is specifically a feeling that draws our minds or our hearts to God or makes us especially aware of His presence. So like you might feel joy and peace when you have a really good meal or go for a walk, but if they aren't drawing you to God or making you feel His presence, then they aren't the kind of spiritual consolation that Saint Ignatius has in mind. Desolation, on the other hand, or spiritual desolation, is the opposite of consolation. Desolation is a feeling marked by things like feeling anxious about your spiritual life, feeling abandoned or cut off from God, feeling unsettled or ill at ease, or feeling hopeless about your spiritual life. And again, it's important to stress that we're talking about these feelings as they relate to your spiritual life. So you might feel depressed or anxious if your girlfriend breaks up with you, but it isn't necessarily going to be spiritual desolation if it doesn't have to do with your relationship with God. Spiritual desolation, on the other hand, might look like, considering giving up praying because you'll never be any good at it, for example. So why are these terms important? They're important because in really oversimplistic terms, the basic principle of Saint Ignatius's rules is that God will call us through consolation. God does not send us desolation. He does not want us to be desolate. When we truly find God's will, it will be marked by peace, not by anxiety. It'll be marked by hope and not despair. One caveat, though, is particularly important. Before we start using Saint Ignatius's ideas to help make decisions, it's also really important that we each look at ourselves and discern whether we're right now really trying to do God's will, or rather we're locked into patterns of sin. This is important because Saint Ignatius points out that if we are already seeking to do God's will, if we're on, generally speaking, if we're on a good path, then God will use consolation to keep encouraging us in that direction. But if somebody is heading in a bad direction, if they're going from sin to sin to sin to sin, then God is not going to send them consolation to encourage them in that direction. Instead, He might send them something kind of alarming to shock them out of it or to snap them out of it. When somebody is already addicted to sin or already in a really sinful habit, then God might use their conscience to trouble them, to bite at them, to make them feel disquiet, as a sign that the life they're living right now isn't a good life. God might allow them to feel dissatisfaction or a troubled feeling as a sign that this isn't the path they should be on. So it's not the case necessarily that God's will is the thing that feels good, but rather God's will is the thing that brings with it a deeper, a more lasting peace. As Saint Ignatius himself learned when he was recovering from his injury, it is only in doing God's will that we will find not just momentary pleasure, but a deep and lasting peace.